The Second World War began some 80 years ago. How and why did you come to write this book about Wymondham?
The story begins a very long time ago, really, relatively speaking. It began about 2003. I was chairman of the museum at the time, and Anne and I were looking through cupboards at the museum and the Bridewell, sorting out, and we found 4 cardboard boxes. And in those boxes were musty, dusty, disorganised papers. In fact, they were documents relating to Wymondham's part in the Second World War, how it affected the town. It has documents of the council's measures. It has documents about all the volunteers who helped during the course of the war. In fact, the home front had been hidden in 4 cardboard boxes. So we thought this was a fantastic find and we ought to do something about it. And the following year, having looked at it, researched it and done some work on it, sorted out a bit, we did a display at the museum on the home front in 2005. Also at the same time we invited back to the town, to the museum, some of the former evacuees, who are now fully adult obviously, to come back and enjoy the occasion. And also the WI in Wymondham laid on some special contemporary food. So that was 2005, and then between 2005 and 2016 we were very busy with the museum. We did 3 or several other books during that period and had a hip operation. Then eventually we decided we should get back to this book. The 80th anniversary was approaching, and so we made a start on the book. And we felt it had to be, a tribute to the townspeople, to the council, and it needed, to be put in a book. The people deserved it.
Of all the stories you tell in the book, which do you think is the most telling about what life was like in the town during the war?
Well, there's the story of Peter Wharton, a local butcher. He was waiting to be called up, and to fill in his time he was acting as a volunteer messenger for the fire brigade at £2 a month to use his own bike. He was sort of relaying messages between firemen and helping run out the hose. They went to Norwich quite a lot to help out in the Wymondham Fire Brigade, and on one occasion they went to Cayley's, the chocolate factory, when it was bombed and on fire, and they spent the night there, and then they were sitting in Chapelfield Gardens feeling exhausted about 5 o'clock, and they noticed an unexploded bomb, so they left. And he got home about 6 o'clock in the morning, and when he went in, his dad said to him, "I've got the van ready. You're going out on your butcher's round in Morley." I mean, I assume they gave him breakfast, but this is really illustrating what happened. You volunteered, you often were up all night, but then you had to go to work again the next day. That to me is an illustration.
Wonderful, yes. What effect do you think the influx of Americans during the Second World War had on the town and the county?
Well, I think one of the influences it had was it brought home to the people in the town what war was about. And I think a story to me which illustrates this is that early one morning 2 young people were crossing the footbridge at Wymondham station, and they noticed a lot of smoke coming from the Attleborough direction, and to their amazement this train pulled in with about 18 coaches with red crosses on the top, and they started to unload wounded American soldiers who had come back from the D-Day landings and the Normandy campaign afterwards. And the boy thought, it looks as if we've lost the war. The girl thought, this is what war was all about. And I think, that brought home to Wymondham people what it was really about. And I mean, 6,700 American airmen, mainly, I think, did die here during the Second World War. That's something that people don't always realise.
Yeah.
And a lot of Wymondham people got to know, airmen, and particularly girls. They got quite close to them, and it was quite devastating when something happened to them, and it did. I think also, obviously, it changed the social life of the young women. It was quite exciting, all these new faces in town and lots of dancers, etc. Also, a lot of young boys got very interested in the air bases, and there's one story about two young lads at Deetham. Their mother used to bake fresh bread, and they took it to one of the huts at the Deetham Air Base, and one of the airmen concerned asked us if we could trace these boys. This is about 70 years later. And I happened to be on Keith Skipper's programme on Radio Norfolk, and I said to him, can I appeal for these, you see? And he said, I bet you when you get home you'll have a phone call. And I did. They rang up and they met later on in the year, which was very nice, obviously.
Absolutely.
Yes. And I mean, there's one chap we knew, Pat Ram from Old Buckenham. I mean, he was, as a young boy, was always on the base. He has a huge collection of photographs on the base, and he continued with this interest all his life. So for some people, it was a real influence on their life, the influx of Americans in Norfolk.
The impression a reader gets from the book is that everyone in the town was willing to do their bit for the war effort. Was this really the case, and were there any instances of townspeople not fully cooperating?
That generation is regarded widely as the Great Generation, so you would expect them to be pretty cooperative, especially when there was a war on. But nevertheless, there were exceptions, and I'll just try to highlight one or two for you. If we start with the evacuees, 1,000 of them arrived on the 4th of September, and the town had to accommodate all these. Plans had been made for many, many weeks and months, but the fact remained there were 173 rooms short. So not everyone really, jumped at the idea of having strangers in their house. One mother said, I don't mind the kids, but I don't want the mothers. So that was one example. Another completely different one would be in the military plan. There was a very, very carefully worked out plan to defend the town in the event of invasion, and this was chaired by Edwin Gooch, the chairman of the council. And there were particular places in the town which were regarded as vulnerable, and if there was an invasion, people in the houses in those streets would be evacuated. And one of the streets actually was the one we're in here, another one was Browick Road. And one of the council would make arrangements, or people were asked to make their own arrangements with a relative in a local village or something. But there was one man who wrote on the form, I'm only leaving my house on the point of a bayonet. Well, another example, I suppose, would be with the Americans. When they were here, the council wrote to the townspeople and said, would you please offer some home comforts to the Americans? They're lacking in these. Fireside chat, game of cards, a light snack, etc. Now, actually, we found 50 or so returns to this. There may have been more, I don't know. But the vast majority of those were very, very supportive and did their best. Of course, what people offered varied from individual to individual, because some people had more money than others. But one woman sent the letter on to her husband. Whether that was wise, I'm not sure. But she forwarded it to her husband, who was serving in the forces. And he was outraged. And he said he accused the council of encouraging immorality because his wife had unkind remarks. You can imagine what they were. Sorry.
Well, there was another lady who replied that she had helped our own boys, as she put it, and Americans. She had mended their socks and given them a cup of tea and coffee, etc. But the people round here were frowned on this because, of course, her husband was away, in the forces. So
They made unkind remarks.
they made unkind remarks.
Yeah.
Life in Wymondham changed beyond recognition because of the war. Which changes do you think are still felt today?
Well, I think Wymondham. I think people had to get together in the war and volunteer, do things, and I think really that sort of spirit has always been in Wymondham. There's always been a lot of voluntary organisations here, whether that is a sort of spin-off of people working together in the war. That is a possibility. Of course, it's not so easy to sustain now because of the changes, in life today. But I think people have always valued the sort of market town atmosphere here, where you could buy what you wanted in the shops, get the services you need, and that community feel. And I think it's still here today, and possibly I think the influx of so many people in the war has possibly helped a bit, because in the late 60s expansion began here. Population was 5,500 at the beginning of the war. It's now 15,000.
And there's in the industrial estates
But
around
the
the
voluntary,
edge of the town too.
yeah, the voluntary concept is still strong. Even though often the new people do more look to Norwich for shopping and entertainment, because we're so close. We've suffered a bit because we're close to Norwich.
I think the war did make Wymondham people more receptive to newcomers, because there were hundreds and several thousand at one point of newcomers in the town, and they did cope with this. And after the war, of course, it was easier to adjust to all the changes that were going to happen in the post-war world, really.
Yeah, I think also it made people aware of the shortage of housing, and in fact, Wymondham actually was very good after the war in building local authority housing. We got a very good stock in Wymondham. And that became obvious, I think, when so many people were here.
Yeah.